Everyone. A few announcements, and then we're going to start our time this morning with a special shadow play put on by our youth. But as you may have kind of figured out, everything is going to be indoors today. We just figured it better not to get all your awesome candy and Easter eggs too wet. So just a couple announcements. Hopefully everybody got a card like this when you walked in. If you did not, there's some on the welcome table. If you didn't bring a basket or a bag, I also just put a big stack of bags behind the table. So grab a blue teal bag when you grab your card, and you can use that to fill up all of your goodies. After the play, there will be a light brunch, finger foods, that will be available in the fellowship hall. And while you're heading that way, we'll be setting up the egg hunt here in the sanctuary. So don't visit that station first. Give us a chance to set that up for you guys. Also, if you look on your card, there's a story walk, and that's in here, going to be in here too. And it's just these signs that run along the back of the sanctuary that retell the Easter story. Everything else you'll kind of see as you walk out into the lobby and go back through the classroom hallways and into the fellowship hall. And we've got some teen helpers there. If you don't know where you're headed, just ask one of them and they will direct you to your next location. We have a candy guessing game out in the Holy Grounds coffee area. There's a big jar of multicolored candy, and we want to have all of those guesses submitted by 12:40 because we're going to count those up and announce the winners at 12:45. We'll have 5 winners who get the closest to the right amount of candy that's in that jar. The person that gets the absolute closest, I will dump that entire jar of candy into your bag. You're welcome, grown-ups. All right, without further ado, our youth are going to present for you a shadow play called O Glorious Day.
A beautiful day, a long time ago, the sun shone brightly overhead, and the sand partridges flittered about in the fields just outside of Jerusalem.
2 young men enter. They are followers of a man whose name has reached Jerusalem long before they did. Disciples of a man named Jesus, whose teachings have stirred up excitement all over Galilee.
And while the citizens of Jerusalem await the arrival of Jesus, these 2 disciples do their best to coax a stubborn donkey to follow them.
You see, Jesus has sent them for the donkey, a quiet, simple creature, a symbol of peace, a symbol of humility.
But Jerusalem was far from peaceful as Jesus and his disciples approached the town.
There was an air of anticipation as men and women, young and old, left their homes to line the streets in the hope of catching a glimpse of the man who was said to perform miracles.
A man who could turn water into wine.
A man who could heal the blind and the deaf.
A man who could bring someone back from the dead.
They removed their cloaks and laid them on the street.
They cut branches from the nearby palm trees and waved them in the air as Jesus passed them, crying out,
"Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest."
It was a joyous day filled with much celebration.
Finally, this great man they've been hearing about, a man whom many claim was the Messiah, had come to Jerusalem.
But not everyone was happy to have Jesus in their midst.
The local Pharisees were concerned. There could be a problem.
They didn't like how Jesus was exciting the crowds. They worried about his power and influence over the people of Jerusalem.
So in secret, they met with one of the disciples, Judas, to discuss how they might be able to get rid of their little problem.
Together, Judas and the Pharisees worked out a plan for Judas to betray Jesus. he would lead the Pharisees and soldiers to Jesus and would confirm his identity with a single kiss.
And for his help, Judas was paid the sum of 30 pieces of silver.
A worthy sum to receive for one little kiss.
Or was it?
A few nights later, on Passover, Jesus gathered with his disciples in an upper room of a home in Jerusalem.
Shortly after the meal began, Jesus did the unthinkable. He removed his outer clothes, took a towel, and tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a wash basin.
He began to wash his disciples' feet.
Jesus washing the feet of the men who followed him?
When Jesus came to wash Peter's feet, the disciple asked, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" To which Jesus answered, "You do not understand what I am doing now, but you will understand after these things."
Peter was upset. How could Jesus, his teacher, his Messiah, his friend, lower himself to wash Peter's feet? It was Peter who should be washing Jesus' feet.
Jesus explained, "You call me teacher and Lord, and you do so correctly, for this is what I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example. You should do just as I have done for you."
And in that moment, Jesus' disciples understood. Jesus wanted them to humble themselves before others, to pass along a message of love from God above.
What they did not yet understand was that the night was far from over.
Now it was time for the Passover feast. Jesus and his disciples ate and drank.
They talked and laughed,
They relaxed and refreshed,
not realizing what lied ahead.
never knowing the true significance of this night.
And then Jesus stood and picked up the bread.
The disciples stopped their chatter and turned to their teacher.
Jesus gave thanks over the bread and then broke it. He gave it to his disciples and said,
"Take and eat. This is my body."
After they finished, he took the cup and gave thanks. He gave it to his disciples and said,
"Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood, the blood of the covenant that is poured out for all for the forgiveness of sins."
A simple supper of bread and wine. But did they understand, the disciples, that the meal that they had just shared was so much more than bread and wine? It was goodbye.
Later that night, in a nearby garden, Gethsemane, a place filled with beauty, a place of calm and quiet,
Jesus brought his disciples in the hopes of finding some peace before the sorrow of what he knew was coming.
he wanted his friends by his side. He needed them to keep watch while he prayed to his Father.
In anguish, Jesus fell to his knees, praying, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me."
But as he looked back, he found his disciples had fallen asleep. Asleep at a time like this, with death at his doorstep? How could they?
Jesus said to them, "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?"
But the disciples could not comprehend what was in store for their teacher and friend, and so once more sleep overtook them. Then Jesus spoke again to God, saying, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, then your will be done."
As before, Jesus found he had been forsaken by those he trusted most, only this time it was too late.
Judas,
Here to carry out the plan devised by the Pharisees,
to keep his promise.
to fulfill his destiny.
And as the other disciples began to stir, Judas did what he came to do.
A single kiss.
That's all it took.
The Pharisees had their man.
And Judas had his 30 pieces of silver.
The early morning hours, the sun just barely breaking above the horizon, the governor Pontius Pilate reflected on the case he must judge that day.
A man who claimed to be a king? The king of the Jews? Or at least that's what the Pharisees accused him of.
They said he was dangerous,
That he would unite the people against Rome.
that he would overthrow the government. But had he actually committed the crimes for which he was accused?
Was he guilty or innocent?
But the Pharisees would not be deterred. The wheels were already turning. The plan was in motion.
The soldiers brought Jesus to stand trial before Pilate. And as he stood there looking at the prisoner, this so-called dangerous criminal, Pilate saw a man, a humble man, nothing menacing about him. So Pilate asked Jesus,
"Are you the king of the Jews?"
to which Jesus replied.
"You say so."
But as the Pharisees heard their accusations against him, Jesus said nothing.
Pilate asked, "Don't you hear the charges they are bringing against you?"
Jesus remained silent. What could Pilate do if the prisoner wouldn't even speak up to defend himself? Didn't he know how serious the charges were? Didn't he know Pilate would held his very life in his hands?
Pilate turned to the gathering crowd of Jews and said, "Who should I release to you? This poor, humble man kneeling before me, or Barabbas?"
The crowd cried out, "Barabbas!"
Once more, Pilate gave his decision to the people and asked, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ?"
To which the crowd answered, "Crucify him!"
And though Pilate could find no crime, no wrongdoing committed by the quiet, calm man before him, he gave in to the cries of the crowd and sentenced Jesus to death.
And as he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, he said with disgust, "I am innocent of this man's blood. You take care of it yourselves." There, high on a hilltop, in a place known as Golgotha, Jesus died on the cross.
And as they raised the cross, those closest to Jesus came to be by his side.
Mary Magdalene, an ardent follower and friend.
John, his disciple, the one he called beloved.
And Mary, his mother.
They stand guard as Jesus endures what he must.
And then,
as darkness came over the land?
Jesus looked to the sky, to his Father, and knew the time had come.
He bowed his head and said,
It is completed.
"2 days later,
Another garden.
Jesus' body had been buried in a nearby tomb with a large stone rolled in front of the entrance.
But when Mary Magdalene arrived to anoint the body, she was shocked by what she found.
The stone had been rolled aside.
Mary Magdalene was inconsolable. She didn't understand. Where was Jesus' body?
Just then, 2 angels in white appear and say to her,
Woman, why are you weeping?
Mary replied, They have taken my Lord away, and I do not know where they have put him.
And then the most amazing thing happened. Jesus, who only days before had been put to death on the cross, appeared, no longer dead, but alive once more. He called out to the woman before him.
Mary.
And in that moment, Mary knew the promises Jesus had made to us all were true.
He is the Messiah, the Son of God, sent here on earth to sacrifice himself for the forgiveness of sins.
And on this day, we can rejoice once more because Jesus is alive. He is risen. O glorious day. Have him come out, take a bow.
Can I have all of our actors to the front of the curtain, please, to take a bow for that beautiful performance? Come on out, everybody. And bow. Good job. Awesome. Well, now that we've heard this incredible story, I invite you to make sure you have your cards and your bags ready and head out to grab a snack and do some stations, and we will get the egg hunt ready for you in here. Thanks, everybody.